Then There's California, a podcast featuring members of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus discussing their lives, legislative priorities, policies, and other related issues that help make California exceptional. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. June is Pride Month. Every year across California and the U.S. and around the world, various events and celebrations are held during this special month in celebration of LGBTQ self-identity, inclusivity, and equality, and as a way of raising political awareness and honoring the global influence and impact of the LGBTQ community. As with every celebration or large group gathering that was on the calendar in the pandemic spring of last year, the organizers of Pride 2020 across the world saw the writing on the rainbow, so to speak, and the planned in-person gatherings and commemorations of Pride were either canceled or moved to a virtual platform, which I know was a real heartbreak for the community and its allies. So we can only assume in the vaccinated spring and summer of 2021, Pride organizers are doing whatever they can to migrate as much festivity away from the virtual and back to the street once again. On this edition of Then There's California, we'll talk about Pride's past, Pride in the present, and even Pride for the future. And I cannot think of a more appropriate individual with whom to have a reflective and foresightful and even joyous conversation about Pride than with one of California's most distinguished LGBTQ leaders, influencers, and mentors. Toni Atkins is the leader of the California State Senate. Not only the first member of the LGBTQ community to serve as Senate President pro tem, but also the first woman to serve in this leadership capacity. When she is not busy supervising and negotiating with and motivating her other 39 colleagues in the upper house, she is joyously uplifting and inspiring the residents of her 39th Senate District, which includes the majestic city of San Diego and the coastal cities of Coronado, Del Mar, Solana Beach, and La Jolla. Before she was Senate Pro Tem Atkins, she was Assembly Speaker Atkins, selected in 2014 by her colleagues in the lower house to be the first openly gay leader of the state assembly. She also served as a member of the San Diego City Council and as mayor of the city for a time as well. And Pride and the community it celebrates and the history it symbolizes are close to her heart and soul, and it is a pleasure here in this month of Pride to welcome back to Then There's California, Senate Pro Tem Toni Atkins. Madam Pro Tem, good to see you.
Brian, thank you. I love that warm-up introduction. That was joyful.
Well, good. That's what we wanted. That's the theme we want here during this Pride Month conversation. I am privileged to have you join me on this podcast in the midst of, when is it not crazy, but particularly this year in the spring, summer of 2021. How are you?
You know, I'm great. I am fortunate. It has been a difficult and interesting year, to say the least. I think if I were to say what have I come out of this period of time with an awareness of, it is a few things. One, you got to be prepared to pivot. And we have in the Senate for the last 3 years. We've had to pivot. I think listen closely, but act intentionally. That's something that I've really carried away from this time. But also, you know, I go back to my roots. I'm a twin. And With that in mind, I've always been a we, and I always think in terms of us. And I think through this pandemic, that's what I've noticed amongst my colleagues, Californians. We have acted intentionally together to try to get through this difficult time. And I know there have been many challenges and some sad stories, but I am optimistic that we have weathered this well together as an us and a we.
I cannot imagine what a year you have had as a leader in the California State Legislature and all of the way out of the box thinking and strategies, and thankfully the we attitude that you have taken over this past year since shutdown, closing the Capitol to the public, all of the ancillary civil justice issues that have happened around it. It's been quite a year.
It has, and I think we have been really thoughtful about how to make sure that we focus on getting the legislative job done, trying to help hurting and struggling Californians through the resources that we've brought to bear through the pandemic. But also, you know, thinking creatively. And I will lend back to my LGBTQ roots. If there is a community that's more creative, I don't know. We have had to adjust, pivot, think differently about how to celebrate Pride, for example. And there's no community better suited to work their way through that and figure it out with flair.
I have talked to several of your colleagues over the last months, And some of them have shared with me the different hobbies or new life habits that they have learned or adopted during the shutdown. One of them has learned to bake bread. Another has brought chickens into the family and is growing heirloom tomatoes. One is putting the finishing touches on a new book. One is diving into family genealogy. I think you probably know who each one of these people are. So what pandemic muse has Pro Tem Toni Atkins brought into her life in this past year, if you have actually had any time during the distraction of the last 13 months?
Well, I would say I bake pies. I learned to bake pies, which I always thought was so difficult. And I learned it was a way to do something that I could have some thinking space, but be creative and have a product that was enjoyable. Although I've also been dieting, so I'm not eating the pies.
More for us.
I'm making pies and giving them away and putting them on Instagram. And between that, I would say Jennifer and I have walked a lot more, and we have a COVID puppy, Mia Hamm, a little toy poodle, Chocolate, looks like a little brown bear, and of course we still have handsome Joey, our street dog. So we've really found joy in our dogs, in walking, in time together that we haven't had. We both work really hard and making pies.
What's your favorite flavor?
Egg custard pie. My sister and I, my twin sister and I, and my mother loved egg custard pie, and we searched everywhere to buy egg custard. Turns out not a lot of people sell egg custard pies.
Sure.
You wouldn't believe how simple it is to make. So I now have learned that.
That sounds fantastic. Let's talk about pride, the joy of pride. One could say, considering everything just mentioned here and what our state and country and world have been through this past year, how lucky we are to even be able to focus even for a moment on pride. But in fact, this celebration, this time for the community is significant just as much in these times as it has been in past decades. What is pride to you?
It is an opportunity to, proud, to be proud of who we are as people, our authentic selves. And pride gives us the ability to do that. And there are some who still say, do we need pride? Do we still need pride? Well, let me just say, as we look across the country and we see that our transgender siblings are facing challenges still across the country. Frankly, let's look at what's happening in the API community and that hatred that's been reflected across the country. So many members of the API community are also members of the LGBTQ community. So there is that bridge. There is still a need to celebrate our diversity, the pride in who we are as people, and to take that forward and make a visible statement that we're here, we matter, our voices matter, and to give some celebration to that. And
you bring up a good point, how important it has been over this last year for communities to embrace each other.
Intersectionality
exactly.
of our issues, of our communities, of who we are. There's lots to celebrate, and there's lots of reasons to do it to give us strength and hope that we will work through these challenges that continue to exist.
When was your first Pride?
Oh, gosh. Well, my first Pride in which I got to be out amongst a parade was 1986. I got to San Diego in 1985 in October, November, so Pride had already happened. But it was that next year, 1986, and to be in the streets in San Diego, the sun, what a beautiful community, and to feel good to be amongst crowds of people like me. And it was also the time of AIDS and the AIDS quilt, and
right.
And to just be with community, surrounded by that energy, that love, that optimism, was a wonderful thing.
We have this impression that San Diego is a conservative city, but in fact it is really not. So one would say Pride in San Diego in the 80s, but in fact the community was strong then as much as it is now.
Well, you have to remember I was fresh off the route from Southwest Virginia.
Right.
I came out when I was 18 years old in college in Southwest Virginia. That was 40 years ago. Very different. Most of us found ways to come out and to be quiet about it. I don't remember ever doing a Pride celebration in Virginia. I remember how important the gay bars were for our ability to come together. And it took many of us years to find each other there. So San Diego, while people said, you live in conservative San Diego, I'm like, are you kidding?
You came from conservative Appalachia.
Exactly. A part of Appalachia that was very conservative. I mean, clearly there were great places. There was Washington, D.C. There was Atlanta, Georgia. But, Southwest Virginia is a whole different world, or it was 40 years ago.
Is there a Pride in Appalachia right now in Virginia?
Absolutely. in all parts, whether we're talking West Virginia, Southwest Virginia, yes, it's a very different place. My home state of Virginia elected the first statewide trans person in Danica Rome. Very excited. Now, she is from a more progressive part of Virginia, but she was elected on issues related to transportation and infrastructure and, you know, real issues that we represent. I was so proud to see my home state have the first transgender person elected.
Well, that is something definitely worth celebrating. And speaking of Pride, as I'd mentioned, and as you know, in-person Pride celebrations quickly were canceled in 2020 as COVID thrashed this state and country and the globe. But the Pride organizers, being a creative and inventive lot, held these virtual local and global celebrations. So here we are in June of 2021, coming out of the dark in this pandemic, people feeling more safe about circulating and celebrating next to each other, maybe. What do you think Pride celebrations are going to look like this year and even moving forward?
Well, I know that different communities are doing different things, and you mentioned the creativity. San Francisco Pride is hosting drive-in movies. Los Angeles highlighting volunteer opportunities. Long Beach showing a virtual retrospect and looking at safe picnics later in the summer. Fresno collected runway looks for folks to slay it with pride. And in San Diego, I know that we have a number of things. We've already had a virtual concert by our women's chorus featuring songs of hope and resilience. That's our theme.
That's true. Pride is not limited just to June. It gets a running start earlier, right?
We've coordinated very well so that we can celebrate Pride throughout the country in different times, so that if we wanted to experience it in person in the past, we could celebrate many Prides. Virtually, I also heard there was just a virtual makeup tutorial that was a lot of fun, and I'm sure there's more on the way, and I certainly am looking forward to benefiting in San Diego. We have a number of things planned. I'm doing a Q&A on June 4th in my own community, San Diego Pride. Again, I told you the theme is resilient. Right. And so I'm looking forward to it. Just opened up a whole new world of what we will be able to do going forward, which gives more opportunities for people to participate that might not otherwise have been able to.
I asked you about when your first Pride was and talking about the early times in San Diego and coming of age and coming out and being part of Pride. Do you have a particular memory of the Pride experiences from the past, exclusive from the memory of starting to celebrate back in San Diego at that time?
Right. Well, I think there was nothing like that first Pride in San Diego that I got to be out and feel amongst the community. But I have to say a couple of highlights would have been 2019, the 50th anniversary of Stonewall in New York. I got to participate in that in New York and the Wall of Honor to honor those certainly trailblazers that really started the whole concept of Pride. But I have to say the other one was actually not necessarily during Pride Month. It was the March on Washington in 1993. Mm-hmm. And that was special because not only did I get to participate in Washington, but I was there to support Chris Kehoe, our first open LGBT elected person in San Diego. She was there to have Victory, the organization that supports LGBTQ candidates. She was there to get their support for her historic run to be a city council member in San Diego, and I was there to support her. So having said that, Stonewall in 2019, 1993, the March on Washington, I still have the bracelet that has numbers on it for how many people showed up. But every Pride is special, and every Pride is different, and I enjoy them all.
Right, and it sounds like your memories, your scrapbook, are filled with some of these little touchstones of the past with Pride. I want to use your memories and your enthusiasms about past Prides as sort of a pivot into your personal story, coming of age and with County Virginia, and when you were at that time in college, when you were ready to acknowledge your sexual orientation, did you have any freedom of expression or identity going to college back in Virginia?
Well, certainly. You know, I like to say in our community we do it with pride, with flair. But at the same time, I lived in the South. I was 18 years old. I was going to college. You know, most people know that I grew up blue-collar, working class, grew up in a house with no running water. You know, so as a woman, as someone from Appalachia, I was struggling with those issues. When I realized that I was also a member of the LGBTQ community, that was an additional check of the box of who am I and what does it mean. So I think as a Southerner, you know, we found ways to come out amongst ourselves and to get the support we needed, understanding that we were probably in a very potentially dangerous environment if we weren't careful. So we found ways to come out to each other. I had a college professor who was my advisor who made it very safe, not just for LGBTQ, but he worked with us in the women's community, the feminist community, to find our voices on campus. And so he was that safe harbor. And to bring it forward, when I was sworn in as speaker in 2014, he was here.
That's wonderful.
So we found ways to come out. And I will tell you, my parents were always supportive. The community at large, not so much, but my family was embracing, and I always felt their love.
Was that more the exception than the rule in that part of Virginia at that time?
You know, I don't know. I think for my family, it was you always support family. And we struggled together. We were a we. And my parents didn't understand it, but they were people who loved other people. I mean, one day, I came home from college, and I had gone to a gay bar or two, and I had not yet told my parents this. I come home, I come upstairs, my mom and dad are in the dining room playing some board game with these two women who I clearly could tell were lesbians. And of course, my thought was, oh gosh, I hope they haven't seen me at the bar and told my parents yet. My mother pulls me into the kitchen and she says, now, Toni, they're gay. You be nice to them. They're in our home. That was the mother and father I knew. Didn't always understand, didn't really understand it, but it didn't matter because you were kind to people in your world. You treated everybody well. And my parents loved me. I always have known that.
You mentioned you had a twin. Did you guys have that symbiosis of twins when one cries, the other tastes salt?
My mother would always say when I called, well, I knew you were calling. I just was on the phone with your sister. So we do. We're not identical. We're fraternal.
Right. But
we've always been close. It's what brought me to San Diego. She was stationed in the Navy here in San Diego, was soon to have her baby, her son, my nephew. Her husband was in the Navy. So I came to San Diego to help support her while she was serving in the military. And, of course, she went back to the East Coast, and I never left because I'm like, I am in California. This is where I've always wanted to be. This is my home.
I assume, using the we thinking that your family had, your sister was supportive of your coming out and your identity expression, correct?
Yes. Very much so. And, you know, her son, my nephew, who I came out to support, is a member of the LGBTQ community also, which, you know, we learned years later. I watched that before my very eyes. So, yes, I've always had the support of my sister, my parents.
Senator Laird, we had him as a podcast guest a couple of months ago, right after the new session started, and we talked about the legislative LGBTQ caucus circa 2021. Senator Laird says he's the oldest. He calls himself the dean of the delegation. And then there's Alex Lee in the Assembly, who's only 25, which is extraordinary. And Senator Laird talked about his personal and political coming out as one of the first openly gay mayors in the U.S. at the time, and the challenges and risks of talking to his family and running for office when candidates didn't openly discuss or declare their sexual orientation, when there was homophobia in the workplace and in laws and attitudes, even in liberal coastal Santa Cruz. And he talks about attending forums nowadays and rallies in present times for LGBTQ youth and hearing young people talking openly, high school students, 14 years of age, coming out. And he mentioned to me how surprised he was at this public openness and willingness. You're coming out at 14? So looking back at yourself in college in Virginia and in Appalachia growing up, could you conceive yourself, even though you had the support of your family, the tenor of the time and the community, can you imagine that public coming out back then?
Well, not compared to what we see today. I mean, we see young kids as young as 3 and 4 and 5 years old. I think of Rylan in my own community and telling his parents at a young age who he was. And you know what I think? I think kids have always told us who they are. I just don't know that we've always listened. Or we've said, you'll grow out of that. We haven't listened. I think people are beginning to listen to their children in different ways. Parents like my parents, who you wouldn't think would have any understanding. Rylan's parents were, you know, suburban parents, a firefighter, a realtor. They had no connection to the LGBTQ community before Rylan told them, I am Rylan. I am not a little girl. I am a little boy. And they heard him, and they changed their whole world to support their son.
Absolutely. They love their child.
They love their child. So what is different is I think we're listening. And I think that is a wonderful thing. But, we have so much to learn. I'm 58 years old, and when I did the non-binary piece of legislation, the Gender Recognition Act, I was even learning as I did the bill because it's a new experience. And so I think what we need to think about now, moving forward, is how the generations can communicate with each other and have tolerance for each other's experiences, and even turn it into something like reciprocal mentoring. Let the young people mentor me because I don't know what they know. Hear our history and know what we struggled to get through and why we weren't as open then as they can be now. I think that's the beauty of what we have to experience moving forward.
I've heard that in college, at Emory and Henry College in Virginia, that you were part of the first women's studies class at the college and that you were influential in shaping the content of the class. Were you a revolutionary, an activist, an agitator in that sense, or was it more your style to affect change in that more subtle way, like changing curriculum in a class?
Well, if the definition of activist today, people might look at me and say, "Oh, you're so moderate." We weren't then. We had our own feminism class. I brought Holly Near to campus.
Oh yes, the feminist singer, folk singer. Yes,
from California.
Yes,
Ukiah.
I remember Holly Near.
Ukiah.
Yes.
Women's music was a sustaining thing for us then, and when I heard her name, and my professor, who was here for my swearing in, said, "Holly Near, a lesbian activist songwriter," my ears perked up. I'm like, lesbian? And then I started to listen to her music. And 2.5 years later, I figured out as an organizer how to bring her to campus. And the dean at that time said to me, he couldn't bring himself to say the word lesbian. He said he wanted to talk about the controversial nature of Holly Near. And I said, well, we have Helen Caldecott coming. She is very prolific on nuclear arms. We have Admiral Zumwalt coming. I said, so what is controversial about Holly Near? He could never bring himself to say the word lesbian. So I said, okay, I guess we've got no problem. And she came to the campus, and that was a very radical act. I brought a film to campus and got it included as part of the Lyceum credits, and everybody could go because at the very end, you had to get a number of Lyceum credits, and if you didn't get a passing grade. So I interjected this coming out stories of some of our lives into the curriculum so that people had to go, and they would all be there together, and it was the last night, so people had to go, so people could come in and feel protected and safe, like it's the last chance to get credit. But they got to see a coming out film. So those of us who wanted to go see it would be safe, and no one would know that we were there because we wanted to be, as opposed to we needed credit. So I was an activist, but in my own Southern way.
I love this. Final question as we wrap. Looking forward to the future. There have been, in fact, some truly breakthrough moments for the LGBTQ community in government and leadership positions across this country. And there was a census just a couple of months ago showing an 88% increase in their elective presence and power since 2017. This is history making. So you've talked in the past about how leaders, even like Christine Kehoe, had to find their own funding and had to work harder than their peers to make a difference or to show that they could make a difference. What does this new profile and agency of the community mean here in 2021 and moving forward?
We don't have, much like gender and women in office, we don't have the kinds of numbers that we would like to see. But we have made great strides, and I do think it's important that we continue, whatever our voice, the diversity, we need to continue to move forward with that. I'm so proud to be part of making that possible. We need to help other people be able to do it. In California, we really need to support and help more of our transgender siblings be elected. The fact that Virginia was ahead of California is something we need to think about. We see ourselves as the progressive future of the United States. We are the cutting edge of tomorrow in California. We all have room to grow, and so we've still got our work to do. And so I look forward to these opportunities to help others be successful. As Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris from California says, I may be the first, I will not be the last.
And that is the beautiful note we will end on. thank you so much. It means a lot to me for you taking out this busy time in your schedule when everybody wants a piece of your time and you're thinking to join me here on our humble little podcast. So,
Brian, this was fun.
Good.
You gave me a bright spot in the day to reflect on some wonderful memories and some great things.
Great. It was fun for me, too. Great to hear your memories. Senate Pro Tem Toni Atkins from San Diego. And ladies and gentlemen, that wraps up this edition of Then There's California. We are a production of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus with technical and production assistance and great ideas from Martin Ashley, Bob Brulty, Brian Shadden, and Rainier Sabiniano, John Roman, McLeana Woods, Lisa Murphy, and the graphic artistry of Tim Davis. On behalf of Senate Pro Tem Toni Atkins of San Diego, I'm Brian Green at the State Capitol in Sacramento. Happy Pride, everyone, and thanks for listening to Then There's California.